Happy Tuesday, everybody. Welcome to another episode of China Update, where I provide you with the most up-to-date political, economic, and geostrategic analysis on the world's #2 economy. My name is Tony. Let's jump in. And we begin, as we usually do, with the economy. Yesterday, Monday, saw the release of China's trade data. Now, unlike other official numbers published by Beijing, these are typically very accurate as they can be verified with trading partners. On the face of it, the numbers look excellent. Great news for China, taking some pressure off policymakers. However, as we will see, the devil is very much in the details, and the situation is not as good as it looks. China's trade data in December beat expectations by a large margin, with exporters continuing to front-load shipments as concern over additional tariffs mount. Exports in December jumped 10.7% in US dollar terms from a year earlier, beating expectations of a 7.3% growth in a UK-based Reuters poll of economists. It compares with 6.7% growth in November and a spike of 12.7% in October. In December, shipments to most markets climbed, with double-digit increases to the Association of Southeast Asian Nations and the US, where exports grew 18.9% and 15.6% respectively from a year earlier. Interestingly, Vietnam overtook Japan as China's third-largest export destination for the first time. China's exports to Vietnam in 2024 rose almost 18% to a record $162 billion US. That surpasses the $152 billion in shipments to Japan, previously the third-largest market for Chinese exports. The reason for the shift is likely that many Chinese manufacturers are moving their operations to Vietnam in the hope that they can avoid future tariffs from the US and others against China. Now, that is on the export side. The import side is a far less rosy picture. Customs data also showed imports rose just 1% last month from a year earlier, reversing from the contraction in the previous 2 months. That compares with a bigger drop of 3.9% in November and 2.3% in October. With these data, China's trade surplus with the rest of the world reached a record of almost $1 trillion in 2024, specifically $992 billion. Now, this is pretty incredible. As the US-based New York Times writes, quote, "When adjusted for inflation, China's trade surplus last year far exceeded any in the world in the past century, even those of export powerhouses like Germany, Japan, or the United States. Chinese factories are dominating global manufacturing on a scale not experienced by any country since the United States after World War II. End quote. Now, some commentators will point to this performance and say, look, China is seeing $1 trillion in trade surplus. How can you say the Chinese economy is in a bad state? To this observation, there are 3 points to be made. 1, most analysts acknowledge that China's trade numbers represent a rare bright spot for the economy, with the rest of the economy experiencing varying degrees of poor performance. 2, having all your proverbial eggs in one growth basket is risky at the best of times, but is especially dangerous for China in this environment. China's sole growth engine of significance is currently exports. Of China's $992 billion of trade surplus, more than a third was with the United States. And this news comes just 1 week before President-elect Donald Trump re-enters the White House and promises high tariffs on China. Indeed, economists say that the figures benefited from front-loading of exports as producers tried to ship goods ahead of an expected trade war with the incoming Trump administration. Nomura economists, for example, in a research note yesterday expressed, quote, "Given the threatened tariffs, we expect export growth to remain robust in the near term because of front-loading." End quote. What's more, as we discussed on Sunday, China is facing a record number of trade tensions with not just the US and the EU, critical markets, but also developing nations like India too. 28 trading partners launched investigations into Chinese imports last year, up from 18 in 2023. Notably, the list included more developing countries such as Thailand, Peru, and even Pakistan. So China's trade surplus is as much an Achilles heel, an area of vulnerability, as it is a sign of strength. And as for the third point, the trade surplus in many ways is symbolic of China's structural crises, which have crippled other parts of the economy. Surplus, after all, is the difference between imports and exports. Imports remain chronically low, not because China doesn't want things from the rest of the world, but because its own domestic demand is also chronically weak. We have explored this at length in previous videos. Exports, in part, remain very high because since the property sector imploded in 2021, Beijing has redirected state-subsidized capital from housing into manufacturing. Manufacturing had already been subsidized in the past as well. This has resulted in overcapacity and producers having to sell internationally to minimize losses. It is now well established that many manufacturers cannot make money selling only domestically. This is why China has seen over 24 consecutive months of producer price deflation and why corporate profits are so poor. As Gary Ng, senior economist at Natixis, told US outlet CNBC in an interview yesterday, quote, China's deflationary pressure in the manufacturing sector may continue to fuel more geopolitical tensions. End quote. While the New York Times did compare China's manufacturing to the state of the US economy after World War II, in the case of the US in the 1940s and early 50s, the manufacturing sector was booming because it had a world to sell to. In China's case, it is highly subsidized, losing money, and reliant on an international market that is turning against it in order to move its inventory. Even this issue of overcapacity has become very politically incorrect within Beijing. Despite Beijing in 2023 identifying overcapacity as a serious issue in the economy, since it is now fueling a global trade backlash, it is politically unacceptable to discuss it in Beijing. With the release of these trade numbers yesterday, the Deputy Director of the General Administration of Customs expressed, quote, Chinese overcapacity issue does not exist and is a purely false proposition, end quote. So, while China's historical trade surplus is a symbol of its strength in some ways, it is also a sign of sickness within its wider economic system and a deep source of vulnerability. Next up, we move to a concerning development regarding Taiwan. But just quickly, if you're getting some value from today's episode of China Update, I have a huge favor to ask. That is just to hit that like button. And if you have not done so already and you think you would watch another one of these episodes, subscribe and hit the bell notification icon and you'll be on top of the most up-to-date analysis as China Update is released. Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links are also in the description for those who want to help keep China Update financially sustainable. Thank you so much. Let's continue. In a deeply disquieting development, France-based military outlet Naval News, in an exclusive report, has discovered that multiple barges designed for amphibious landings are under construction at a shipyard in Guangzhou, southern China, adding that they do not seem to have an obvious civilian use. It is worth quoting the article at length. Quote, Naval News has seen multiple sources confirming their construction and has shared information with naval experts to validate our preliminary analysis. The consensus is that these are most likely for amphibious landings. Each barge has a very long road span, which is extended out from the front. At over 120 meters, 393 feet, this can be used to reach a coastal road or hard surface beyond the beach. At the aft end is an open platform which allows other ships to dock and unload. Some of the barges have jack-up pillars which can be lowered to provide a stable platform even in poor weather. In operation, the barge would act as a pier to allow the unloading of trucks and tanks from cargo ships. The barges are reminiscent of the mulberry harbours built for the Allied invasion of Normandy during World War II. Like those, these have been built extremely quickly and to novel designs. End quote. I did not expect 2 references to World War II in one episode of China Update. Dr. Emma Salisbury, Sea Power Research Fellow at the Council on Geostrategy, told Naval News that, quote, any invasion of Taiwan from the mainland would require a large number of ships to transport personnel and equipment across the strait quickly, particularly land assets like armored vehicles, end quote. These mobile piers appear practically suited for an invasion. Dr. Salisbury added, quote, as preparation for an invasion, or at least to give China the option as leverage, I would expect to see a build-up of construction of ships that could accomplish this transportation. End quote. Former National Intelligence Officer for East Asia and CIA analyst John Kluver, in a post on X, observed on the news yesterday, quote, this revelation of new portable bridge docks is a signal that the next 18 to 24 months are likely to see some shocking new PLA capabilities. The operational challenges for the PLA are daunting. There are specific problems that need to be solved for invasion or blockade to be viable. The bridge docks, if produced in sufficient numbers, could enable heavy over-beach operations. The new US administration is going to confront PLA developments that will drive tensions and blur analytic debates over Chinese capabilities and intentions. Buckle up, end quote. The traditional view is that there is only a small number of beaches on the main island of Taiwan which are suitable for an amphibious landing, and these could be heavily defended. These new barges could change that calculus. As Naval News explains, quote, "The extreme reach of the Bali bridges means that the PRC could land at sites previously considered unsuitable. They could land across rocky or soft beaches, delivering the tanks directly to firmer ground or a coastal road. This allows China to pick new landing sites and complicate attempts to organize defenses. Instead of relying on Taiwanese ports, China can now sail its own mobile port across the straits." End quote. Taiwanese observers said the PLA's new capability reinforced the need for Taipei to target Chinese forces before they have reached the shore. Lin Yingyu, an assistant professor at the Graduate Institute for International Affairs and Strategic Studies at Taiwan's Tamkang University, expressed with the news yesterday, quote, "It is their large amphibious assault ships, their helicopters, and airborne forces that we must be able to target. It is like in baseball. They may have chosen a very good closer, but if we fight well in the first wave, that skill will not come to bear." End quote. Okay, that is today's episode of China Update. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Have a good Tuesday, and I will see you all tomorrow.